Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we're going to do another Scottish beer, and this is a brewery that I always like visiting simply for the fact that they were the very first Scottish craft brewery. So of course I'm talking about Broughton Ales, who are from Biggar in the Scottish Borders region, and today we're going to have a taste of their Ghillie beer, which is an English style bitter, meant to be a very nice beer, so I quite look forward to tasting it. Never tried it before, but I have to give a big thank you to the Broughton Ales brewery for this review as well. They actually sent me a case of 9 or 10 of their different beers to review for you, and they also sent me this very nice glass as well. So a big thank you to Broughton Ales for supporting my channel in that way. And that's one thing I really enjoy about this channel, is being able to share Scottish beer with those of you in America and Canada, Australia, all over the place. I really like it doing the Scottish craft beer reviews, and I seem to get very good feedback for it as well, so always cool to review a Scottish beer for you. But as is usual with my reviews then, I'll take you through a very kind of brief history of the company, just a minute or two long, but if you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. The brewery website's in the description for you below, along with a link to my other reviews that I've done from Broughton before, and there will be another few beers added to that in the very near future. So as I mentioned to you, Broughton Brewery was founded in 1979 by David Younger and James Collins in a former abattoir in the very small village of Biggar in the Scottish Border region. And Broughton Ales is regarded as the first Scottish microbrewery, and in this time, back in 1979, they marketed themselves to customers looking for a craft beer experience as an alternative to the mass-produced lagers and export beers that were the real kind of market dominators at the time. But Collins and Younger released their first beer, which was the Green Mantle Ale, to great success, and the brewery became well known throughout Scotland as a result of that. And this beer was actually so popular that the locals in the Borders began to refer to the brewery as the Green Mantle Brewery, and it's considered a cult classic by many of the older generation of craft beer lovers in Scotland. My dad always talks about the Green Mantle Ale as being one of the beers that he grew up with, and I've reviewed it for you before, so go and take a look at it if you want a sort of real take on the start of Scottish craft beer. But the Green Mantle Ale helped greatly increase the demand for small batch brewed beer in Scotland, and the brewery decided to introduce a few other ales soon after, and this was the Old Jock Ale, which is a classic Scotch ale, very nice beer, Merlin's Ale, which I've reviewed for you before as well, and they also had the Scottish Oatmeal Stout, and each of these beers were named after a well-known character from the Scottish Borders region, and this is something that has stuck with the brewery ever since, as you can tell by the name Ghillie beer. But in 1995 the brewery underwent a change in ownership, and it was taken over by Gillis Litchfield, who introduced the Beers with Character moniker for a series of 10 bottled ales, and he wanted to increase the exports of the brewery primarily, and he began doing this in 1996, and since he started this, the brewery has actually been growing ever since. One of the probably the biggest breweries in Scotland, as well as being the first one now actually. But today the brewery exports to Italy, France, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Canada, and also Japan. I actually saw a few of their beers when I was over in Japan, and I'm sure I've seen them in Australia as well. So wherever you're watching in the world, do keep an eye out for these beers. This is really where Scottish craft beer was born, and even though I'm Scottish and maybe a little bit biased, Scottish craft beer is very good quality, even when you put it against the American and the New Zealand things and stuff. We have a really good craft beer scene here in Scotland, so really do check it out. You won't be disappointed by most of the things you try. But just to list a few of the other beers for you that these guys do, they do Merlin's Ale, which is a bitter, Black Douglas, which is a strong bitter, Border Gold, a golden ale, the Oatmeal Stout, Exciseman's 80 Shilling, which is a traditional Scottish style beer. I'll review that for you soon. They've got the Ghillie, which is this guy here, the bitter, Green Mantle, which as I said was the very first Scottish craft beer, which is also a bitter beer. They also have an organic lager. They've got 6.2 IPA, which is really nice, and also the Old Jock Scotch Ale. I think that's all of them covered, but in total they have 8 bottle beers, 10 permanent casks, and over 15 different seasonal beers. So check out their website and you will get an idea of all of the different beers that these guys brew. So anyway, to tell you about this beer itself, this guy is a 4.5% bitter beer. It contains Fugels, First Gold, Brewer's Gold, and Pearl hops. These are all from England and Germany apparently, and the malt base in this guy is Optic Pale Ale and Crystal Malt. So the description that they always put, as I said to you, each of these beers have a different character, and the description that's on the website for this one, it says originally a Ghillie was the clan's chief bearer, and that he stood behind the clan chief in battle, and the Ghillie today is a much respected pithy character who guides the sportsmen of the world on salmon and trout rivers in Scotland. One of the most famous of these of the River Tweed has a source very few miles from the village of Broughton and winds its way over 100 miles through the beautiful border countryside of Scotland. So this is why the beer is called the Ghillie. And one of the things you'll notice about Scottish beer, a lot of Scottish beer has a really nice minerally taste to the water, and it's a really unique characteristic of our beer that we have here, and I think it adds a really nice kind of dimension to the flavour. So let me know in the comments section about that below. It's always interesting to hear from my kind of foreign viewers about Scottish beer. So we'll get on with the tasting of this guy now. As I said to you, it's 4.5%. You can have a little look at the artwork here. You can see the guy with his fishing rods just kind of trotting around in the river, the old guy with his nice kind of tweed hat and stuff. And I do like the way Broughton do their artwork. They've got the kind of classic sort of ringlet that you would see on the old pump casts, and they all have the St Andrew's cross on them, which I think is really nice considering they're the very first Scottish craft brewery. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but there's hop flowers engraved into the glass on the bottles here, which is another trademark of Broughton Ales, but the bottle cap is just plain. So as I mentioned to you before, this guy is a 4.5% English bitter beer. It contains Fugels, Brewer's Gold, First Gold and Pearl hops from England and Germany, and also has a malt base of Optic Pale Ale and Crystal Malt. So let's get this guy open and get on with the tasting then. As you can see, a nice kind of smoky opening. I'm just going to pour half of this because my dad wants to try a little bit of this beer too, so I'll share the rest with him. So as you can see, the beer's poured a very nice kind of bright goldeny colour there. I'll just check how you're seeing this on the camera. So as you can see, it's come out a very nice kind of bright goldeny amber colour. I'll just bring up the light so you can see it properly. It's showing up a little bit darker on the camera, I'm noticing, but you've got a nice finger of a very frothy white head there, and I got a good whiff of smoke, of fruit actually, sorry I should say, as I was pouring the beer. It is a little bit hazy, but at the same time there is some transparency, so you can see my fingers if I just put it behind the glass there, but it looks really nice white frothy head. There's no sediment visible in it, but there's a lot of nice little carbonation going up towards the top of the head. On this one, it's very nice small bubbles, but there's some bigger bubbles sticking to the side of the glass as well, so it looks a very nice beer. So let's give it a smell and see how we get on then. So one thing you'll always notice about the Broughton Ales that I find, they've got a very kind of distinctive malt base on them. The malt base always has this kind of cereal, it has a typical kind of oatmeal-y cereal smell. And this is a bitter beer, so you would expect a lot of that to come up in the flavour. But I always find Broughton Ales have a really nice, big, bready and slightly oatmeal-y malt base on them. I really like that about their beers. When it has a big, bready base, it always, to me, is a very good beer. But you smell the typical elements of a bitter in this guy. You've got a nice cereal element to it. But it's quite a subdued malty nose. It's not as strong as some of the beers you're going to come across. You can definitely pick up the crystal malt, but there's a big bready presence in this one, as I say. There is a definite caramel and biscuit element to it as well, but I think there's a kind of oatmeal presence, like I say, and it's slightly toasted too. But the Broughton Ales, to me, as I say, cult classics of Scottish craft brewing, and you get that nice big typical Scottish ale nose to this. But there's some kind of citrusy and aromatic hops coming out of it as well, slightly fruity. But to me, this beer, the nose on this beer really is more about the malt than the hops, I would say. So you've got a nice, big, slightly cereally bread character coming out of this one. You can smell the pale malt element in it as well, but there's a nice caramel and biscuity malt coming out of it too, and it is slightly toasted. But you can just smell that sort of it's almost a slightly sour malty smell, the sort of oatmeal-y character coming out of it. But without further ado, let's give this guy a taste. So this is the Ghillie from Broughton Ales in Biggar in Scotland. Slàinte. It's actually very nicely done. Now, one thing I should point out with this beer, bitter beers really are not my favourite style of beer, and the first one I came across that I liked was actually the Wildcat from the Cairngorms Brewery. But these guys, this one is actually another very nice one. I'm probably starting to change my mind on bitter beers now. But yeah, much like the aroma, you have a nice kind of pale malt and bready flavour coming out in this one. There's quite a bit of cereal in it I think it's got a good kind of roasted cereal character to it, if you like. A lot of the bitterness in this beer really is coming from a sort of roasted cereal, maybe slightly oatmeal-y flavour in this one. You can pick up in the middle of the tongue as well, there's a nice kind of slight sweetness from from a little bit of a caramel malt in there. It's a sort of the beer actually has a little bit of a buttery taste to it, a sort of buttery toast kind of flavour to it, which is quite interesting. So you just get a little bit of a line of sweetness going right down the middle of the tongue, and that's where you're getting a little bit of caramel and biscuity malt coming out on this one. But yeah, I really want to say that there's a slightly oatmeal and cereal flavour to this one. But that's mixing with a sort of earthy character from the hops, I think, and that's a very kind of typical characteristic of the English hops. I remember the First Gold and the Fugles hops. The Fugles hops usually gives you this kind of ashy sort of flavour to it, but you're not picking that up so much, but it's definitely in there in the blend. It's not punching out with this kind of ashy character that the Fugles hop can sometimes do, but that's definitely contributing to this sort of very dark roasted cereally character in there. That's a characteristic of that hop. And the First Gold as well, from what I remember, that's probably where you're getting some of the caramel out of this one actually. In Brewer's Gold as well, you're getting the caramelly, you get a slightly kind of grassy element that really helps bring out the sort of caramel flavours from the malt in this one. But the Optic Pale Ale is, from what I remember, that gives you a nice biscuity sweetness, and you can really pick that up in the middle of the tongue. But otherwise you've got quite a big blanket of just that very light lagerish malt in there, but there's a definite oatmeal presence which I really think is coming from the Fugles hop and the First Gold in particular. So yeah, we've got a really nice kind of pale malt base on this one that just blankets the tongue. You've got a sort of bigger breadiness just on top of that, but it's not that prominent. But right in the line down the middle of the tongue, you're getting a nice sort of sweet caramel and biscuity element coming out there. But there is a big cereal presence round the edge of the tongue where you always get the hoppy characteristics of the beer. You have a really sort of slightly roasted cereal and slightly oatmeal flavour in there. As I say, I think that comes from the First Gold and the Fugles hop in particular. But it's very nice actually. As I say, the bitter isn't one of my favourite styles of beer, but they've done this one very well, and the flavours kind of blend together really well. So this is something that I would actually consider having a wee half of sometime. There is a wee bit of fruity character. There's a definite kind of lemony citrus comes out. You just get a little oil, a little bit of a bubbly oil moving towards the front of the tongue, and you get a little bit of citrusy fruit around that. But around the edge of the tongue, particularly at the front, you have a sort of kind of light grassy hop character, maybe a little bit of aromatic kind of spice in there, but that comes out a bit as you move towards the kind of back sides of the tongue, and that's where you're getting the earthy character from the hops coming out. And as you move slightly forward, you get the aromatic, dry, kind of bitter flavours out of this beer as well. But I think there's a big earthy character on the back corners of the palate, but a nice grassy and citrusy element at the front of the tongue, moving into a slightly aromatic, then you get the earthy characters. But it's a very interesting blend of flavours, this beer. As I say, the bitter's not my favourite style of beer, but I can drink this one, so it is quite a good one in my opinion. In terms of the mouthfeel of this beer, I would say it's quite mid-bodied. It's got a nice smooth beer, and this is one thing I think that Broughton do very well also, is the fact a lot of their beers taste like they're cask conditioned, and they taste like they've come just straight off the old wooden cask pumps in the bar, and this beer is no exception to that. It's almost got that slightly creamy mouthfeel to it, so it's got a very soft and smooth carbonation. As I said, you get a slightly oily character on the tongue as well, which is where the kind of citrusy fruits leading to the grassy hop comes out. You've got a little bit of sweetness from the malt where the caramel and biscuity elements come out, but you've got a nice bitter and dry character that remains into the aftertaste of this beer, so that's where you're getting the earthy flavours, slightly aromatic, and then the grassiness on the front of the tongue. So overall, it's a very, very nice beer. It's a very interesting blend of flavours that blend together very well. The most prominent characteristic is definitely the earthiness and slight aromatic character for me. It's got a particularly prominent kind of roasted cereal and slightly oatmeal flavour in this one, I think. But as I always say, beer is subjective, so you might view the kind of cereally flavour slightly different from what I'm picking up. So do let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on this beer below. As I always say, it's been really cool to visit Broughton Ales for you again. A big thank you to them for supplying the beer for this review, and I do have another 3 reviews to do from them on that note actually, so you can look forward to that in the future. But I thank you again for watching my beer reviews. Please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. Go and check out Broughton Ales Brewery, the very first craft brewery in Scotland. Their beer is awesome, and I hope you've enjoyed this review. So I'll catch you soon with more Broughton Ales reviews soon. Thank you. Cheers.